Rome had crushed mountains, deserts, and seas, so how could a forest end an empire's advance? In the year 9 AD, 3 Roman legions marched into Germania believing the war was already over. These were not recruits or desperate levies. They were veterans of conquest, men who had broken rebellions from Spain to the Balkans. Rome did not send legions to die. Rome sent legions to impose order. Yet within days, that certainty would dissolve into panic, confusion, and annihilation. At the center of this story stands a simple mystery. How did the most disciplined military force on Earth walk into its own destruction without realizing it was already trapped? The answer is not just about ambushes or terrain. It is about arrogance, trust, and a single decision that rewired Rome's understanding of power forever. The commander leading the column was Publius Quinctilius Varus, a man chosen not for battlefield brilliance but for administration. His mission was not war. It was paperwork, taxes, courts, and census rolls. Germania, Rome believed, was already pacified. Villages paid tribute. Roads were mapped. Local leaders pledged loyalty. This was supposed to be a routine march through a quiet province. That belief was the first crack in the armor. 200 words into this march toward disaster, the first twist emerges. Rome's greatest enemy in Germania was not a wild tribal chief screaming defiance from the trees. It was a Roman citizen. Arminius had served in the Roman army, commanded auxiliary troops, spoke Latin fluently, and understood legion tactics better than most Roman officers. To Varus, Arminius was proof that Rome's system worked. To Germania, he was something far more dangerous, a man who knew exactly how Rome thought. As the legions moved deeper into unfamiliar forests, warnings began to surface. Rumors of unrest, reports of distant revolts, nervous scouts. Varus dismissed them all. Discipline would handle disorder. Roman roads would tame wilderness. Arminius himself urged speed, advising Varus to march quickly to suppress a supposed uprising. The legions obeyed, unaware they were accelerating into isolation. Rain fell, paths narrowed, columns stretched thin, shields were soaked, armor weighed heavier with every step. Still, no enemy appeared. That absence felt reassuring. Rome feared visible resistance, not silence, and that misreading of silence would soon become fatal. By the time Varus realized the land itself had turned hostile, retreat was already impossible. The legions were no longer marching through Germania. They were being guided, shaped, and funneled by someone who knew exactly where panic would bloom first. At the moment Rome believed it was restoring order, it had already surrendered control, and the forest was closing behind them. What Varus could not see was that every step forward erased a path back, and every trusted guide was cutting the last thread of safety. The legions would soon learn that discipline cannot save an army once belief collapses, and the next sound they heard would not be commands, but screaming from the trees without warning at all whatsoever. The screams did not come from a single direction. They echoed from everywhere at once, splintered by trees, swallowed by rain, reborn behind the marching column. Roman soldiers spun, shields raised, searching for a line to form, a front to face. There was none. Javelins burst from the forest edge, then vanished. Slings cracked unseen. Warriors struck and melted back into foliage before orders could be shouted. The legions had trained their entire existence to fight enemies they could see. Here, sight itself had been stolen. Varus ordered the column to form defensive positions, but the terrain mocked Roman geometry. Mud swallowed boots. Trees broke formations. Wagons jammed narrow paths, turning supply trains into barricades of panic. Discipline did not vanish instantly, it fractured. Centurions tried to hold ranks while wounded men slipped into the undergrowth and were never seen again. Every delay made the forest louder, closer, more alive. Around 200 words into the slaughter, the second revelation becomes clear. This was not a single ambush. It was a campaign designed months in advance. Arminius had not gathered tribes for a glorious stand. He had dismantled Rome's assumptions piece by piece. Roads sabotaged, villages emptied. False loyalty displayed just long enough to lure the legions deeper. Even the weather was chosen. The attack began only when rain would ruin bowstrings, soak shields, and slow movement. Rome had not lost control in a moment. It had been bleeding control for days without realizing it. The legions attempted to break out toward open ground, building a temporary camp under fire, something Roman soldiers could do even in nightmares. But this camp was different. It was rushed, incomplete, exposed. The forest pressed in like a wall. At night, Germanic warriors crept close, shouting insults in Latin, calling out officers by name, proving they knew exactly who was trapped inside. Sleep vanished. Fear replaced exhaustion, and exhaustion sharpened fear. Varus faced a choice no Roman commander expected to confront in a pacified province. Retreat meant abandoning wounded standards, honor. Advance meant walking blind into a killing maze. He chose movement, believing momentum itself might restore order. The next day, the column lurched forward again, weaker, thinner, dragging its dead behind it. Rain returned harder. Attacks intensified. Roman formations dissolved into clusters of survival. Some fought bravely, some broke. Some simply ran and disappeared between the trunks. Arminius never needed to strike directly. His warriors attacked nerves, not lines. Officers first, messengers second, cohesion always. By the third day, Varus understood the truth too late. This was not a rebellion to be crushed. It was an execution. The legions were being erased, not defeated. And as Roman standards fell one by one into the mud, Varus made a final decision that would shock Rome more than the defeat itself. A choice that would transform disaster into catastrophe when the forest closed in for the final time. Varus did what Roman commanders were trained never to do. Surrounded by chaos, bleeding, and unable to issue orders that still mattered, he fell on his sword. To Rome, suicide was preferable to capture. To the legions still fighting, it was something far worse. It was confirmation that command had ended. When the general died, the idea of Rome died with him in that forest. News of Varus's death did not arrive as an announcement. It spread as a feeling. Orders stopped coming. Standards drifted without direction. Cohorts began acting independently, not as parts of a machine, but as isolated groups trying to survive the next hour. Roman warfare depended on belief as much as steel, the belief that someone above you saw the whole field. In Teutoburg, no one did. The Germans sensed the shift immediately. Attacks grew bolder. Ambushes tightened. Roman attempts to negotiate were mocked or ignored. Prisoners were taken not for ransom, but for example. Some officers were sacrificed. Others were enslaved. The psychological war Arminius had planned now reached its climax. Rome's soldiers were no longer facing an enemy. They were facing the certainty that the system they trusted had abandoned them. A brutal truth surfaces. Even now, not all legions were destroyed at once. Some units fought their way out of the forest. Some reached open ground. Some even tried to regroup. But survival came at a price Rome had never paid before. Eagles, the sacred standards of the legions, were captured. For Romans, losing an eagle was not a military loss. It was a spiritual rupture. An eagle lost meant a legion erased from history, its name never used again. The forest did not just kill soldiers, it erased identities. As night fell on the final day, resistance collapsed into pockets. Groups of Romans barricaded themselves behind wagons. Others made last stands on muddy ridges. Many were hunted down individually, chased through brush by enemies who knew every path, every shadow. The legions that had marched in confident columns now died alone, separated from banners, brothers, and purpose. Arminius never delivered a speech. He never stood over a battlefield to claim glory. His victory did not need witnesses. It only needed completion. By the time the last organized resistance ended, 3 full legions, 17th, 18th, and 19th, had ceased to exist. Rome would never reuse those numbers again. But the true shock was still ahead. Survivors were paraded across Germania as living proof that Rome could bleed. Stories traveled faster than armies. Tribes that had obeyed quietly now reconsidered. Allies hesitated. Governors grew cautious. An idea once unthinkable took root beyond the Rhine. Rome was not inevitable. What Arminius understood, and Rome had not, was that empires expand on confidence more than force. Break the confidence, and the borders retreat on their own. And when word of Teutoburg finally reached the capital, the reaction would reveal just how deep that wound truly was, and why this defeat would haunt Rome long after the forest reclaimed its dead. When the messengers reached Rome, they did not bring details. They did not need to. 3 legions missing was enough. Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, is said to have wandered his palace shouting, "Varus, give me back my legions." Whether the words were recorded exactly or not, the reaction was real. This was not anger, it was disbelief. Rome had lost armies before, but never like this. Not vanished, not erased, not betrayed from within. For months, Rome refused to accept the scale of the disaster. Officials searched for survivors. Generals debated whether the reports were exaggerated. Surely some legions had escaped. Surely the eagles could be recovered quickly. But as time passed, certainty hardened into dread. Germania was not quiet anymore. Forts east of the Rhine were abandoned. Garrisons pulled back. Roads once planned were erased from maps. Rome had not just lost men. It had lost the future it assumed was guaranteed. Around 200 words into Rome's reckoning, the next revelation becomes unavoidable. Teutoburg did not just stop an invasion. It permanently changed Roman strategy. For decades, Rome had expanded by absorbing land, imposing law, and moving the border forward. After Teutoburg, that confidence shattered. The Rhine was no longer a temporary line. It became a psychological wall. Germania was no longer unfinished. It was dangerous. Tiberius, Rome's most capable general, was sent to stabilize the frontier. He conducted brutal punitive campaigns, slaughtering villages, burning fields, and recovering 2 of the lost legionary eagles years later. But these were not conquests. They were controlled displays of force, carefully limited. Rome struck, then withdrew. Every move signaled restraint. The lesson had been learned at an unbearable cost. Inside the empire, fear crept into policy. Recruitment tightened. Commanders became cautious. Local allies were watched more closely. Never again would Rome trust a frontier leader as completely as Varus had trusted Arminius. Never again would Rome assume loyalty meant submission. The empire survived, but it survived differently, more guarded, more rigid, more aware of its limits. Meanwhile, Arminius did not become a king of Germania. His victory unified tribes briefly, but unity born of war fades quickly. Rivalries returned. Power fragmented. Rome did not need to conquer Germania after Teutoburg. It only needed to wait. The forest had done its work once. Rome let time do the rest. Yet the greatest consequence of Teutoburg was invisible. It reshaped Europe's future. The lands east of the Rhine would develop outside Roman law, language, and infrastructure. A cultural divide hardened. Latin did not dominate. Roman cities did not rise. A different world took shape, one Rome could influence but never absorb. And that raises the final, unsettling question. If Teutoburg changed Rome's destiny without toppling the empire, then what truly broke that day? The legions or Rome's belief that expansion was inevitable? The answer lies in what Rome chose never to attempt again. Rome told itself that restraint was a choice. Officially, Germania was not worth the cost. The land was poor, the tribes disunited, the forests endless. But beneath that logic sat something far more powerful: memory. Every Roman commander who looked east across the Rhine saw not opportunity but Teutoburg. Not maps but mud. Not glory but legions screaming in trees they could not control. This was not how Rome usually behaved after defeat. When Carthage challenged Rome, it was erased. When rebels humiliated legions elsewhere, retaliation followed until submission was absolute. Yet Germania remained different. Punitive expeditions came and went, but annexation never followed. Forts stayed west of the river. Roads stopped short. The empire's expansion engine, once relentless, now hesitated. Teutoburg did not just teach Rome about terrain or tactics. It taught Rome something far more dangerous, that discipline and numbers were not enough. Roman power depended on predictability, on enemies behaving as Rome expected them to behave. In Germania, Rome faced an enemy that refused structure, refused decisive battles, refused to play the role Rome needed them to play. That unpredictability was contagious. It could spread to other frontiers, and Rome could not afford that. So the empire rewrote its own mythology. Teutoburg became an anomaly. Varus became the scapegoat. Arminius was framed as a traitor rather than a strategist. Rome needed the defeat to be personal, not systemic. Because if the system could fail once, it could fail again. Generations of Roman soldiers trained knowing there were places where marching in formation meant death. Generations of politicians governed knowing borders were not always temporary. The Rhine solidified not because Rome lacked strength, but because it lacked certainty. Expansion requires belief, and belief had been punctured. Beyond Rome, the consequences multiplied quietly. The tribes east of the Rhine evolved without Roman administration. No census, no legions enforcing order, no Latin replacing local languages. Over centuries, this absence shaped identities that would later clash with Rome's heirs. Medieval Europe's fault lines trace back not to a treaty, but to a forest ambush no one survived to explain properly. Arminius himself did not live to see this legacy. He was murdered by rivals years later, another victim of fractured power. But his victory outlived him, not as a nation, not as an empire. As a boundary, a psychological one, Rome endured for centuries after Teutoburg. Emperors rose and fell, armies marched elsewhere. The empire adapted, but it never again believed itself unstoppable. And that belief, once lost, never fully returns, which leads to the final realization, the one that reframes everything. Teutoburg did not end Roman expansion because Rome was defeated. It ended it because Rome understood for the first time that there were limits it could not impose by force alone. And in the final part, we confront what that means for Rome, for Europe, and for the way empires fall without collapsing at all. Empires usually fall loudly. Capitals burn, armies mutiny, borders collapse under invasion. Rome did none of these after Teutoburg. That is why the battle is so easy to misunderstand. Nothing ended in 9 AD, yet everything changed. Rome survived, but it survived with a scar it never stopped touching. The ultimate twist of Teutoburg is this: Rome was not broken by defeat, it was broken by awareness. For the first time, Rome understood that there were places its system could not overwrite. No amount of discipline could straighten a forest. No road could fully tame land that refused to cooperate, and no loyalty could be trusted if it was only borrowed. 200 words in, the final revelation crystallizes. Teutoburg was not a German victory alone. It was a Roman self-defeat. Rome chose administration over adaptation. It chose assumption over verification. It believed conquest was permanent once declared. Arminius did not defeat legions in battle, he defeated an idea. The idea that Rome's presence automatically meant control. From that moment on, Rome governed differently. Borders hardened, flexibility shrank, fear crept into command decisions. Over time, that rigidity would become a weakness elsewhere. Empires survived by learning, but they declined by overcorrecting. Teutoburg taught Rome caution, but also taught it hesitation. And hesitation is the opposite of expansion. The forest reclaimed its silence. No monument marked the battlefield. No Roman city rose there to overwrite memory. For centuries, the exact location was debated, lost, forgotten. That too is symbolic. Rome erased many defeats from record. But this one refused to stay buried. It lingered in policy and geography in the invisible shape of Europe. The Rhine remained a dividing line between worlds. West of it, Roman law, stone cities, Latin roots. East of it, different paths, different identities. When later empires rose on both sides, they inherited a boundary created not by treaty but by terror. A boundary written in rain, mud, and screaming trees. Teutoburg proves something unsettling about power. That dominance can collapse without collapse. That confidence can be destroyed without overthrow. That the most decisive defeats are the ones that change behavior, not borders. Rome never marched the same way again, not because it couldn't, but because it remembered what happened the last time it believed too much in itself. And that is why this battle still matters, not for the numbers killed, not for the legions lost, but because it shows how empires stop expanding long before they start falling. If this story reshaped how you see Rome or power itself, then there are countless other moments in history where certainty failed under pressure. Battles where the weaker side did not win by strength, but by understanding the enemy better than the enemy understood itself. If you want to explore those moments where confidence cracks and history turns quietly, stay with this channel. Subscribe, share, and tell us which forgotten battle you want uncovered next, because the most important turning points are often the ones no one saw coming at all.